Gabriel leads a community of 100 people, calls himself the next planetary prince. He started out life as Tony Delavan from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. But according to his own autobiography, after 2 traumatic divorces and the death of a 7-year-old daughter, he began to hear voices. He went to Los Angeles to be a musician, and when that failed, he says, the voices grew stronger. They told him he had had many past glorious lives on Earth. He'd been St. Peter and Alexander the Great.
On February 24th, 1998, NBC's Dateline aired an investigation of Gabriel and his community. Titled True Believers, the report featured undercover sneaky cam footage of 2 producers posing as potential recruits. When host John Larson interviewed Gabriel and his partner Niann, the 2 really seemed to be surprised that the show cast them in such a negative light.
You were Francis of Assisi.
Yes.
Martin Luther.
Yes.
King Arthur.
Yes.
You were also George Washington.
Yes.
Father of the United States.
Well...
Led the troops.
Yes, yes. I'm either insane or egotistically mad, or I am who I say I am.
Gabriel's other major media appearance was in 2011, when filmmaker Vikram Gandhi made a mockumentary called Kumare. It was sort of a new age yes men thing, where an Indian-American filmmaker turned himself into a fake guru. And part of this movie was actually spent in Gabriel's compound.
Everyone seemed genuinely happy. But is this how cults get people to join them? By showing them how happy they are?
I didn't realize it, but I was physically taken onto a craft, a spacecraft.
But they cut it out of his memory.
Yeah, they cut it out of my memory until years later, and they brought it back.
While Kumare seemed to give Gabriel a bit of a pass, Dateline was a little more muckraking, as you'd expect.
We are not in a sexual relationship, but they are spiritual complements.
Have any children with these other complements?
Past lives?
No, currently, here.
Yes, I have children with one of these complements.
I thought you said it wasn't sexual.
It was sexual.
This is what confuses me. I ask you about compliments here, you tell me something that's not true. I ask you about your compliments sexual, you tell me something that's not true.
I have clairvoyance. I knew fully well where you were headed before I even sat down in this chair.
Clairvoyance, you know this is coming. We've had a few Dateline employees come join your community.
Dateline employees?
Employees of Dateline. You know who they are?
Would you like to name me?
Yeah, I'd be
Well,
curious to know.
you're the clairvoyant.
John, a fellow from Florida?
No.
Sanskrita DellErba is a massage therapist living in Tucson. She's 30 years old right now. She enters this story because she is the daughter of Gabriel and Niann. That couple has 3 children, Sanskrita and her twin sister, and then a younger brother. They grew up in the group. You know, when Gabriel met Niann in the late 80s, when he was known as Tony and she was known as Nancy, you know, he was formulating these ideas, and the kids were raised believing that, you know, their father was talking to celestial beings and that the spaceships were going to come down and pick them up someday. And they lived their whole life believing that, and, you know, perhaps they still do, except for Sanskrita. She realized one day that this wasn't the lifestyle for her, and she fled the coop, so to speak.
They considered a training school. They considered training grounds for for the shift that's going to happen once the adjudication swiftly takes hold of the planet. That there will be that they will be teaching people how to walk, think, and be in a time a new paradigm shift. So these people that are being trained in the community will turn around and train other people.
What was it like growing up thinking that the world was going to end and then it didn't?
I remember being really young and truly believing I wouldn't live to be 18. I just couldn't imagine life after 18. I was like, there's just no way I'm not going to live. Or there's just going to be something really big that's going to happen, like Jesus is going to return. And then 18 came, and I was like, oh my God, like life is just normal and continuing and nothing has happened. And then there was the Y2K that happened. We prepared for that. We got bunkers and lots of cans of food and gallons of beans and rice. And
I'll give you the news first on Y2K. The newest developments, the Pennsylvania nuclear plant has been shut down. One of the main systems transferring the power from it failed, but they say it's not a Y2K problem. And the things I'm experiencing here in Austin, Texas, the shelves are empty of water and some gas stations are running out of fuel.
We were ready. We really thought that was going to be a big event, and nothing happened.
If the world doesn't end, does your dad have to backtrack?
Yeah, the other thing I was going to say is my dad is really, really good at keeping the story going and kind of like helping like change the narrative to kind of like help people justify like why it didn't happen. So he kind of will like say something like, well, God decided that the adjudication, there's still people that need to grow or to come to the light, and has mercy, or he always just had a really good reason. And honestly, like it was believable. Like we're like, okay, cool. Like God's just pulling the reins back and stuff, and yay, we didn't all die. But it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. It's just not that date.
I guess if you're going to believe that you're going to be beamed up to a spaceship, it wouldn't be too hard to believe that got delayed for a few years.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah,
exactly. And there wasn't really a lot of explaining things to us kids. So I think that was a bit confusing for us. We also didn't like have any kind of schooling. So when we were 7, we didn't even know the alphabet halfway. So we certainly didn't know how to read, which is really late for kids. So this lady came along. I feel like she was a miracle, a true blessing. And she was a certified school teacher. And she was also interested in the community. And she saw that we didn't know how to read and write and anything. And she was like, what? These kids need schooling right away. And she joined and started a school curriculum. And we started learning. And thank God for her. Like, to this day, I'm like, what would my parents have done? Like, would we just not have learned how to read or write for like years?
In the community, there's something called the chip game. It was created and promoted as a communication tool. This is a 100-person commune, basically, in the desert, and you can imagine that there's the tendency for a lot of drama. There can be a lot of hurt feelings, a lot of miscommunication, and really the leadership promotes the chip game as a way to help group members communicate more openly and honestly and help each other kind of improve as human beings and as potential priests and a spiritual ruling class in their own right. And basically, it's a system of surveillance.
The community is all expected to play this game. And in the beginning days, it was like more like literal. So people were supposed to carry chips in their pockets at all times. And if you saw someone doing something that was inappropriate, you would give them a red chip if it was like obviously, clearly a bad thing. And if it was questionable and you weren't sure, but you feel like they should think about it, it's a blue chip, a thought chip. So there's the red chip, which is the adjudication chip, and the blue chip, which is a thought chip. And there's different forms for these different chips. So once you give the person the chip and you hand it to them and you say, I'm giving you this chip and here's why, and you have to vocalize it and you have to confront them eye to eye, face to face, then you have to go and to computer and type out the form. And tell the person. So like, for instance, I'm giving you this thought chip because when we were having a conversation, you kept talking about how you were troubled with a certain minister here. And I understand that you were concerned, but I don't think maybe you should have been complaining to me as a student. I think you should have gone to the right channel. This is something to think about. Maybe a different way you can do it next time. And then you would receive the form and you would have 3 days to respond. So within those 3 days, you would fill it out, type it back up, send it back to the benefactor. And then that benefactor there was a list of people that they would send it to the soul watcher, which is the soul watcher of every house. they have a soul watcher, and then the supervisors, depending on if it was function related or not. And then it always got back to the top, my dad. And my dad encouraged the community profusely. He was, please chip people. It was kind of his way of keeping a tab on everyone, like a pulse, you know?
So at any given time, he had like kind of like almost a map of like everybody's behavior.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. And you know, I mean, some people in the community were more vindictive than others and loved to chip. Absolutely loved to just get people into trouble. And then there became a new rule that ministers didn't have to sit down and talk to the person because they were so busy that they could just send you a chip in the mail. So any day you could just get in the mail a chip from them, and it was just kind of like off-putting because it was like, oh my God, like, oh, you know, it just, you always felt like you were in trouble. Like there was always this possibility that you were going to get busted. And I always felt that way. I just felt like constantly on edge that I was going to get busted. Even when I knew I wasn't doing anything wrong, I still had this idea. And to this day, I mean, if I see a policeman and I haven't done a thing wrong, I'm still like, oh my God, he's going to come and get me.
Time and space. Space, outer space. Lost pace with the human race. Human race, get a life. Lost face with much disgrace.
So just like Gabriel's always been spiritual and always wanted to be some sort of important man, spiritual leader, he's also always wanted to be a successful musician. A lot of his time was spent in his teens and 20s pursuing a music career. When he was in high school in Pittsburgh, he was in several bands. When he tells stories about his past life, he claims that he was more successful than perhaps he was. I can find no evidence anywhere of him actually having anything more than like a middling local music career. You know, there's advertisements in the paper for shows that he's done, and he self-produced and self-financed a record at one point of his own music in the 80s. He was never a successful musician, but according to his narrative, the narrative of the guru, he had a great promising music career ahead of him, and then he turned it all down because there was a conflict between worldly success and the role that he had to play as a great spiritual master.
I think somewhere along the way, he kind of was torn between his drive for wanting to become well-known as a musician and his desire to also serve the God that he believed in as a Christian. I think that was kind of when he was conflicted about both those pursuits and how they were to match each other and work out. And I think, when he was getting a lot of blockages and pursuing record labels, and they were turning him down, and he says a lot that they asked him to change the spiritual lyrics in his music, and if he just did that, then they would accept him. And he said he could never do that, and I don't know how much of that is true or not. He's definitely one of the most prolific songwriters. He has like hundreds of songs that he's written, just a lot. So I always was kind of blown away by how many songs he's written. It is kind of amazing. Like when he started the community, I think part of his idea was, well, this is a way to kind of fuse my music career with my spiritual career as well. And so he started this symbiotic kind of pursuit and started the community like that.
In July 2011, Gabriel's band had a small tour, a handful of shows around the Southwest. And their first show was in Durango, California. Leading up to the show, the group emailed the Durango Herald and notified them that we're coming to town, we'd like to be in your arts and entertainment section or whatever. And the guy who received the email didn't even work for the Herald. He previously did. He was still getting his emails. His name was Ted Holteen. And he just wrote them the nastiest letter back. He just said, you're no-talent hacks, quote, you'll be lucky to leave Durango without being in handcuffs or slaughtered by an angry mob, unquote. They went on with the show, but the audience was tiny, and Gabriel decided to cancel the rest of the tour. He ended up suing Ted Holteen and the Durango Herald for infliction of emotional distress.
Ted Holteen, he sent the booking agent an email, and it wasn't a nice email. It was for all intents and purposes a very distasteful, inappropriate email that was very angry, and it did have threats in it. They were empty threats for sure, but still, the email was forwarded to my dad. He read it and, called the police. Or had somebody call the police. The police came. He said that we could most likely be mobbed that night. My dad told us this, and he was genuinely, I feel, very shooken up. He was really hurt by it, and it, being his daughter, it was really painful. It was painful to see him that way. So I was just absolutely devastated. It was a really hard trip. It took actually like a couple years to really shake that off.
Really?
Yeah, it was that devastating.
So did you know while this was going on so you were there?
While you were performing?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you went on with the show and that, because I felt like, in my cynical way of looking at things, like you had like a tour that didn't sell any tickets and your dad was looking for an out, so he had this excuse, and then they decided to make a little money off of it with a lawsuit. But it sounds like it was a real devastating experience.
Yeah, it was. I think filing a lawsuit was probably over the top, but it was devastating. We did play that show that night. It was very surreal. There was like 5 people who showed up. They looked like they didn't know what the heck was going on, actually. But he went on with the show, and this is my dad. Like, this is how he is. Like, he will like, that's what it is kind of admirable. Like, it, like to do that. And I'm not saying that everything he does is admirable at all. There's things he's done that's really hurt people. But there's traits that for sure, I can say are admirable. Then he, after that show, went home and he decided to cancel the rest of the tour. I think he canceled it because he was really just too depressed to actually go forward. But his reason that he told us is because he was afraid that there would be more threatening situations, and he wanted to protect us from that.
Gabriel sought more than $1.3 million in damages for intentional infliction of emotional distress, and the case dragged on through the courts for 5 years. Eventually, it ended up in the Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, who ruled in the newspaper's favor. The court dismissed the case with prejudice and awarded the defendants over $100,000 in attorney's fees.
Good morning. May it please the court. My name is Salinas Ruth, and I represent the appellants.
It'd help if you keep your voice up a little.
I represent the appellants Anthony J. Delavan and Shannon Leigh Plyler, Daniel Steinhardt, and Stacy Luther Mitzka. I respectfully request approximately 4 minutes for rebuttal and to address the issue of the appeal of the attorney's fees.
Okay. You argue in your briefing that the district court should have considered the substantial quote-unquote policy of Arizona before applying the Colorado fee-shifting statute. What policy were you referring to? You don't tell me what you're referring to. You just say a substantial policy. You can't just say that and expect me not to ask you.
Yeah, I understand, Your Honor. I would say that I can't respond, but I can send you a response.
The group was actually founded in 1989 under its original name, Aquarian Concepts Community, and it was originally located in the Sedona area. They didn't have a compound. They all lived in various houses communally. And to keep people nearby, Gabriel decreed that his followers stay within a 5-mile radius of the community. He said that basically this was a protected zone on the earth, and when the end of the world came, If they were outside of the 5-mile radius, he couldn't protect them. At first, the community members lived somewhat normal lives. They worked together and they had friendships outside the community. They would gather together regularly for either spiritual study groups or they had like a Thursday night potluck. And this went on for several years until an event that members of the GCCA called the Shift.
Before the shift, people would become members of the community and they would have regular jobs, have their own money, and do kind of like a tithing, like some kind of percentage of donation would go towards the common good of the community. But then they were realizing, or my dad realized, that they weren't doing too well that way. And so he got the idea of everybody turning everything over. I don't know if there's probably a meeting, and he asked everyone if they were willing to do that. And the people who were there at the time were. Maybe they did like a voting and it was the majority that decided yes. And those who didn't just left. But yeah, the shift happened, and that's when money became pooled, and there was no withholding of anything. And that's when really they started being able to do more, and my dad was able to get more nicer things, and he had nicer things. My family had nicer things than the general community members. So there was a bit of a resentment. We actually got a really nice house. We got our second house, which was a very nice house. Got a lot of work done on it. And that was our little paradise for a while. Each house we got was upgraded until the last one we lived in, which was a mansion. Probably the most beautiful house I'll ever have lived in from this point on. It was beautiful. So yeah.
So at what point did the community go from being like 10 people to like 100
I see.
people,
Yeah. It took maybe 10 years to get a good solid 100 people. And once they got that 100 people, it's maintained 100 people. My dad wanted thousands. The whole vision was that there were 7 sectors around the world, and that if he could get enough people, he would, disseminate them among the 7 sectors. And as a kid, I wanted so badly to just be somewhere else. And I was like, oh my God, send me to the Hawaiian one. I was so badly. And I was just like, oh. And then as soon as I got older, I was like, God, why are we still in this? And they will say about me now is that I just didn't have patience, and that I am not able to sacrifice myself, and I'm not loyal. But I just couldn't bear to live there for like 20 years or more. I just was like, this is too small. I don't want to be on this little property. Like, it just seemed very stifling, and it really freaked me out.
Among Gabriel's goals for the organization is living off the land, being sustainable, growing your own food. And that was just not something that was able to be done in Sedona. The soil there, it turns out, is lousy for farming. So they started looking for places where they could find the room to all live together, and they found this area in southern Arizona called Tumacacri, which is about 20 miles north of the Mexican border. It's an agricultural area in the Santa Cruz River Valley, and they ended up buying a 165-acre ranch there for $4.8 million. And they bought another property in Tubac, Arizona for $500,000, and that began this migration over this course of years where they moved this entire operation that had been living in and around Sedona and moved it to Tucson, then in stages built this community, and then moved to Tumacacri eventually.
I kind of remember like my family having all these meetings and hearing little things about a big change that was going to happen. And it seemed really exciting. I was ready for a big change. I mean, like when you're living a life like that, you kind of want something monumental to happen, especially when you're being told something like the Earth's going to fall apart every 10 years and it doesn't happen. And you're like, okay, I want something to happen. So I was really excited and looking forward to this thing that they were meeting about. Sedona is beautiful. It's wonderful. It just doesn't have like a big amount of land for doing what they were looking for, which is having everybody live in the same property.
So where is Tumacacri exactly?
It's kind of off the map. It's near Nogales, Arizona. So it's about 50 minutes south of Tucson, right next. It's in this little nondescript area. It's like a tiny, tiny little town.
A little agricultural.
Yeah, there's not much there. It feels and looks just like how Nogales would look on the other side in Mexico. It took 2 years for us to fully move from Sedona to this new land. We had to move businesses. We had to move all of our animals, our goats, our topsoil. We took all of that compost with us in huge piles, and we had to move the recording studio, all of our businesses, all of the kids and families. So it was in phases. It ended up being a little bit of the Wild West for a while down there, because my dad was living in Sedona, and there was a lot of people who were like, woohoo, like this is it was so far removed from him and his kind of hold that there was like a lot of like crazy situations and stuff that happened, and people.
What do you mean?
Oh, like for instance, like people with alcohol, like people would just drink all the time, and that was very prohibited in Sedona, but down there everyone's just drinking. Lots of things. Oh gosh. Relationships happening that shouldn't have been happening according to rules, lots of like sexual stuff, lots of running off to Nogales and Mexico even, and getting stuff in Mexico and coming back, and just stuff that like kind of would be maybe considered normal like in society, but was absolutely prohibited there. Yeah.
Wow. When did you get down to?
Well, actually what happened is we would go visit here and there. And I developed this relationship with one of somebody who'd been there since I've been a kid. So we'd known each other our whole lives. But there was just this one day I was down there, and he was in his element, which he wasn't in Sedona. So he's like a very like cowboy-like guy, and he started. He was coming to life when he was down there. It was hard to describe, but I saw him in a whole new light. He was like doing manly things and riding horses and dealing with the cattle, and just like, it was cool. And it was amazing for me to see that. And I just was like, oh, and one day I just kind of like fell starstruck for him and got obsessed with him and begged my dad eventually. And we actually ended up getting married.
Oh, really?
Yeah, when I was 19. So that's why I moved down there. The thing is, I knew him my whole life, but we didn't really have a courtship or dating that was like in the same place for a long period of time. It was like between the places. I go for a few days and see him and then go back. And then I just got married, and all of a sudden I was living with him. And so it was kind of quick and rushed, and I ended up falling apart after a year.
Seems like everybody's getting married at 18, 19 down there.
The reason for that, I feel, is when you're living a life like that, it can be a very family-oriented lifestyle. So you're not going to college, you're not getting to travel, you're not getting to go to parties or clubs or raves, or there's nothing like that. It's a very like homegrown, homebound lifestyle. So the natural impulse when you're in that kind of environment is to have a family, is to get married and have kids and make your life interesting by having kids. And so, yeah, a lot of the young people, that's their instinct, is to get married and have kids. And, you know, it's funny. I wanted it so bad. I wanted to have kids so bad. I wanted to find my Prince Charming so bad. And after him, I wanted it so bad. And I wanted kids. And all of my young friends were getting families and having kids. And my siblings got married and had kids. And I was like, why? Why me, not me? And I'm glad now, because I would have had more, you know, I'm glad. I think it was my path that I wasn't supposed to have children and get into a committed relationship so that I could exit and follow my own path.
As Gabriel says, maybe he is living a lie. Maybe the guides aren't real, but just a creation of his own complex psyche. Maybe he has schizophrenic tendencies. I will look at this, Christ Michael. But even as I write these words, there is a confidence within me, a knowing that what Gabriel and I are experiencing is of God, and that the guides do exist as separate beings from Gabriel, that they truly are who they say they are, messengers from Christ Michael. In spite of all Gabriel's shortcomings, these beings are coming to us through him.
Gabriel has two partners in the community. Tiende is the mother of his youngest child, Eleonora. Niann is the mother of the twins, Sanskrita and DellErba, as well as Gabriel's only son, Amadon. Before she co-founded the GCCA, Niann was a schoolteacher named Nancy Chase. Heather Hootery is a hospice nurse living in Wisconsin. She is the oldest child from Niann's first marriage. How did Gabriel and your mom meet?
Well, we went to a, how do you say it? I guess a retreat. Gosh, it's been like 30-something years ago. We stayed in a teepee. The kids kind of did their own thing, and the adults had like a workshop, and it was definitely a new age idea. There's lots of meditating, and I guess there's like a cooking, like maybe a vegan cooking class or something. Everything that we ate, they had grown, and it was all vegan, and I just remembered being really hungry when we left.
Where was that?
It was in Prescott, Arizona, and I'm not exactly sure what it was called, but I know it was in Prescott. And I remember meeting Gabriel and thinking, what a weirdo. Right away, I thought he was a total freak.
Was it a long time between your mom meeting him and him moving in?
We met him at the retreat, and he came to visit us. I think it was maybe the week or weekend after we met him. He came to our house. He had gotten a ride with somebody, and he stayed at our house. I think it was the next weekend, and he brought his guitar, and I just couldn't stand hearing him sing. I thought he was the biggest fruitcake. During this whole time, he was coming and staying more often, and we ended up having kind of like a family meeting, and he had this stick, and he'd call it the talking stick. And we couldn't talk unless we were holding this stick. But, you know, he wanted to make sure that we knew he was moving into our house. I was pretty adamant that I didn't want it to happen. But my brother was really missing my dad and wanting a father figure. So he moved in, and life as I knew it was over.
If you kind of picture that happening, like...
He had this long gray hair, and he would wear these, like, sashes on his head, like a headband, and lots of jewelry, and real colorful, like, garbs, almost like robes, and weird pants. Like, you know, the MC Hammer pants? Something to that effect. Like, I just remember him just looking like a total freak show. And I didn't care for him. I didn't like him being in my house. I didn't like him. I just didn't like him. I knew he had a daughter who passed away. He would sing songs about her. He was just really weird and creepy. He was always trying to make us listen to his music, and I think he had a record. It was called Unicorn Love.
Did you get the sense at all that he was, like, living off your mom, or, like...
Oh, absolutely. He didn't have a job.
Was he just, like, hanging out at home all day, or...?
Yes. He was definitely not cooking, not cleaning, not working. He might have said that he was working on his music, which was just awful. At first he was nice, but then he became very cruel and just really hateful.
Could you describe that a little bit?
Well, I just remember him being verbally abusive, telling my brother that he was stupid, a baby, a crybaby, just that he was glad that we weren't his kids.
Was your mom aware of this going on?
She was. She would make excuses for him she would always say, well, he's grieving the loss of his daughter, and not everybody grieves the same. And she'd say he's an artist in his own way. Right away, she was very enamored with his BS. And I don't know if it's because she was looking for something. She had been married to my dad for 10 years and had a real solid foundation. And I guess I'm thinking that the divorce really threw her sensibilities off a lot. But still, he was a real jerk. And we didn't like him. We were scared of him. We weren't allowed to lock our doors, but we wanted to.
How long was it before you and your siblings got out of the house?
I don't remember when it was, but I do remember my dad ended up just keeping us because my mom went off the deep end. She said she was going to go and live a different life.
You said that your mom's reached out to you. Why did she say why she was reaching out or what that was all about?
Well, actually, I just looked up the community and called the main number. In the past, I've never been able to get a hold of her. An attorney gets on the phone or I get a letter, but I've never been able to actually get a hold of her in 30 years that she's been gone. So I was just driving. I was going to a doctor's appointment an hour away from where I live, and I just did it. I wanted to see how far I could get. And so I called and just asked for her. And Billy obviously was like, who the hell are you? And Nancy doesn't have any kids named Heather. I just said, look, I want to talk to our mother. I just want to talk to her. And so she ended up, like, I guess going across the universe to get her on the phone. And it was just very, hi, how are you? She asked me about my sister and brother, how my dad was doing, my grandparents, just basically small talk. And I let her know that I was happy and that I was thriving. And in spite of everything, I was a pretty well-adjusted human being. And that was it. I was at the hospital, so the phone went dead, and I haven't talked to her since. She's been trying to call, but I haven't been picking up.
Joseph Hootery is Nancy's first husband, the father of Heather. And I spoke to him on the phone for about half an hour. The conversation did not go all that well. He knew I was calling, and he agreed to do it just because his kids are dealing with the fact that their mother ran away 30 years ago to lead the planet. So Joe agreed to talk to me, even though I don't think he was entirely comfortable doing so. He actually asked me not to use the recording of that call, so I'll just explain what the story as he told it to me. Basically, he was a union copper miner working in Arizona when he met Nancy. They were married for about 10 years, and in that time, they started growing apart. And Joseph doesn't really seem to understand to this day exactly what happened, just that he no longer really knew his wife anymore. It sounds like Nancy got really concerned with status. Like, he told me that, he was a union copper miner. He was involved in the union. Nancy didn't seem to think that that was, like, high status enough. So she would tell her friends that he was an engineer or that he was working in research and development. Eventually, she left him, and it might seem strange that she then moved on to becoming the partner of a New Age guru, but really, that's a kind of status in itself.
Niann has a presence and an essence of the universe mother spirit that is become very clear for anybody who meets her and listens to her and works with her.
She's such a beautiful example to me of the universe mother spirit, and I see her in everything that she does.
It penetrates everything she does. It's an embrace. It's a ministering reality that is as close as you can get to an angel.
We have some serious problems worldwide that threaten not only the comfortable lifestyles of some of us in Western civilization, but the very essence of all of
Back in Pittsburgh, Gabriel doesn't have much of his original family left. Both of his parents and his one sibling are dead, and his first daughter passed away tragically when she was 7. That leaves Gabriel's nephew, Dan Bayless, and one niece. Here, Dan is talking about his grandfather, Gabriel's father.
Make sure that everybody knows my grandfather was just a stand-up guy.
Yeah.
He was a stand-up man. Like he raised his kids to be the best people they could possibly be. He worked his ass off. You know, he was just a great guy. And that's what my grandpap was really, really hurt by what was going on, or what he assumed was going on down there. And the way that Tony would start to carry himself, and I hold a lot of resentment towards him because of the way he treated his family, his true family. The day my grandfather died was the day that the Dateline episode aired, which I'm sure you're aware of that episode. Yeah, that was the same day my grandpap died, which we feel was probably a blessing because I might have killed him anyway.
You have to be very strong if your children continue in sinful ways.
Thank you for listening to The So-Called Prophet from Pittsburgh. Episode number 3 was written, recorded, and edited by me, Joseph L. Flatley. New episodes are released every Tuesday, and I can be found on Twitter and Instagram @PGHProphet, or on my webpage, lennyflatley.net.